Right. So this is your Hidden Storytelling Skills Lesson 6, Section 3. This is the Spring 2023 cohort. And this lesson is roughly speaking, applying multiple sliders and taking on 2 Rapunzel's versions. I've made this, I discovered that it's best for me to make it, to give more than I will do and then settle for whatever we actually get to.
Sounds good.
So all predictions are tentative. But while we're here, why don't you just introduce yourself and say your name and where you're from, and something you've gotten so far from the course.
My name is Sarah Armstrong. I'm from Berkeley, California, and I've been fascinated by thinking about looking at the language of stories from different perspectives on continua, and that's very new to me. So that's been really interesting.
Lovely. And give me a moment. I neglected to start a new note for today. So let's make that happen. And so this is lesson 6, section 3, and there's today's date. Well, that's so glad to hear that, Sarah. I'm glad you're getting things from it. And so, because it's just the 2 of us, so I'm happy to give you the whole show. What is that joke about the preacher? There's only one. Do you know this one about some Kentucky or somewhere preacher, and everybody's in the mountains, and so it takes them a long time to get there, and they don't always show up. So this one time, there's this one man comes, still showing the signs of having been working with his cattle, and he comes, and so well, you're here, so we'll do it. And he gives this guy like an hour-and-a-half sermon. And at the end he says, what do you think? He said, well, when my cattle come late, I always feed them, but if there's only one of them, I don't give them the whole trough full.
Oh.
But anyway, I'm going to give you the whole trough full, although because it's you can interrupt and say, I don't care about this, or whatever you want. So
okay.
Let me give the slidey things, which I just can't remember what this is. It, let's see. No. Well, now I'm really confused. Let's see. I just confused myself. Oh, there we are. Yeah, screen sharing. And so you're seeing the you're seeing the slide on the screen as well as me.
No, I'm seeing something weird. YHSS L6S3 2023-0614.
Well, that didn't work. Let's try it again. Let's try sharing the screen and sharing the right part of the screen. How's that?
That's much better. Yes.
Okay. So now we really are starting, and roughly speaking, this is oral language. That's a big part of it. A new slider and the view from multiple sliders, although we'll get how far we get in that. So you've already introduced yourself, so thank you for that. And since you know who you are, you don't need to do that. So how oral language differs from written language. It has its own characteristics that make it work differently from how written language works. And I know that you're pretty savvy about stuff like this, but the world in general doesn't really get it, that those are different things, written language and oral language. And in fact, that's not language. that's just the way you talk.
Yeah, yeah.
That kind of stuff. So 3 of the ways that oral language differs from written language. In oral language, there's more expressive elements than there are in written language, different and more. You can, in written language, very little, pretty much it's word, 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 word. It's sequential, but in oral language, you can be gesturing and talking and smiling and facing in different directions. All those things can happen simultaneously. So that's a big part of the difference. And in oral language, it's two-way communication. Written language is just one-way communication, at least at any one moment. Whereas in oral language, and there's somebody else there or multiple people there, as in now, I am not only saying things, but I'm listening to your responses and responding to your responses. And so that's the two-way communication thing. The expressive elements in oral language, in written language, words is the primary one, right? And punctuation is another, font variations, the layout on the page. There's a couple more. So words is the 2,000-pound gorilla in the room, and there's a few other little accessories, as it were, in terms of punctuation and fonts and all that stuff. Those are all important, but they carry only a teeny bit of the communication that the words carry, and they alter it, but nonetheless. So oral language, on the other hand, there's words, but that's only one of many. And tone of voice is another one. And in fact, tone of voice is so strong that if there's a conflict between tone of voice and words, tone of voice always prevails. You know, right, right. So one tone of voice right means right, with one another voice right means wrong. So it can do that completely. Facial expression, gestures, posture, eye behaviors, rhythm, pauses. I'm doing rhythm and I'm doing pauses, right? Pitch, highs and lows, speed, how fast you go, and those aren't the only ones, but those are big ones here. In oral language, you always use multiple expressive elements at once, such as words, where you stand, what direction you face, so on and so on. The top 20 expressive elements in oral language: word sounds, tone of voice, speed of speech, loudness, pauses, tonal patterns. Those are specifically speech related. But then there's the face and the head, your facial expression, your eye behaviors, the nodding kind of things, which goes forward and back, is side to side, all that stuff. The direction you're facing as you speak. So below the body, below the head, there's gesture, posture, muscular tension, muscular looseness, stability and wobbliness, use of props, your full body, location, where are you? Where are you facing? How are you moving in space? And as we have gesture or somewhere else, but are you moving? Are you turning around? Those things. So these are just really the 20 top expressive elements in oral language. You could increase this list, a lot if you wanted to break things down more. So the idea of a meta message, this is something you're familiar with, right? So I define it as a message about a message. There's different ways that people approach that, defining that term. But for me, a message and then a meta message is the message about the message. So if I say yes, but then the tone of voice gives a meta message of yes, then the yes is a message about the message of yes, right? So meta message. In oral language, one channel can carry a message while another carries a meta message. So you smile with an erect posture. When you do that and you're smiling and your posture is erect, then the smile message is read as happy or confident. If it's a collapsed posture, then the same message, the same message in your face is read as submissive or fearful. Right? Your smile it can be the same smile, but you're this, If you do this, we read it differently. So expressive elements in written language, words is the one that primarily conveys the message. Several other convey meta message, punctuation, variations, layout on the page, and then there's a few others you can pull in. Oral language typically conveys the words, conveys message, but also sort of facial expression and gestures and so on. And meta message typically is conveyed by things like tone of voice, posture, facial expression, gestures, and others. All this making sense?
Yeah, and can I get these lists somewhere?
Yeah. I was in the process of that. So will you remind me at the end of that? And we'll
Sure.
fix it, because there's a little bit of, let's try this way, let's try that way. All right, so
Great.
I am
This is really always interesting to call it out, to see specifics and think about dichotomies and
right.
how that works.
All right, so oral language is typically, when you're in person oral language, more than one person there, well, for oral language, like all language, starts with imaginings in the mind of the speaker and stimulates the listeners or readers or whatever they are to imagine their own images, which of course will always be different, always be unique. So oral language, the initial thing is this is a bridge between your images and their images, and using that bridge, oral language, you stimulate listeners to create their own images. Okay, that's true with written language too, but in oral language, there's the thing that it's two-way. Because you respond to the oral language in your listeners, you respond to their response to you. That doesn't happen typically in written language. There's odd situations in which you can, typically not. So oral language is got this I say something, you respond to that, I respond to your response, then you respond to my response to your response. And that endless cycle of responding to response and how it builds, that actually is, you could define it, but it's certainly a characteristic of rapport. Rapport doesn't happen unless you have some kind of this kind of cycle going on. And it can be conscious and unconscious, but rapport, that is arguably certainly a characteristic of rapport, and it could even be a definition of rapport, depending on how you first want to get. If you continue to respond to each other's responses, you create a cycle of mutual response, which is the foundation of rapport. That's what oral language, how does it affect interpretation? Because we've had this interpretive language slider. We've talked about it really as though everything was written language. And for simplicity, that makes sense, but in reality, there is oral language. And so how does it look with that complexity of oral language? So the nickname, just the interpretive language slider itself, its nickname is the interpretation slider, short for interpretive language slider. The abbreviation is IL. The listener may interpret any statement, but our sliders deal with the language that the teller uses. So there's other things that tellers do and listeners respond to that isn't, strictly speaking, a statement or language. But we're for now just looking at the statements as accompanied by oral language. So this slider deals with whether the language used by the teller interprets for the listener. So this is the interpretive language slider, or the interpretation slider for short. And the range is the one we did in the first. No, it's not the one we did first. But anyway, so on the left side we have pure description. So you use language that's purely describing what happens. He went out the door. no descriptive language in that per se. The other end, you have explicit interpretation, which could be something like, he went out the door dejectedly, or something like that. So now we're interpreting how and the whys of that language, and implicit interpretation would be something in the middle. We'll come to that. So pure description statements are on this left side. They do not include language that interprets attitudes, emotions, or motivations.
Mhm.
So he went through the door, tells the actions, but there's nothing like that. Implicit interpretation statements include language that implies but does not specify an attitude, an emotion, or a motivation. Explicit interpretation statements, of course, language that specifies an attitude, emotion, or motivation. So we'll come into the details of that in a bit. So let's also review the emotionally interpretive language slider, which I believe we did also.
Did we do that one? I don't remember.
Sorry?
Did we do that one?
Well, maybe we didn't.
I don't think we did.
This review will be the introduction of it.
Good.
The different sections, I did different things, but usually everything I do in the first two, I do in the third. But anyway, so let's just call this, not we're going to review, we're going to meet the emotionally interpretive language slider. It's a subset of the interpretive language slider, but focusing on, in particular, the emotional aspect of it. So its nickname is the emotional interpretation slider, as opposed to the emotional interpretive language slider. The abbreviation is EIL, emotional interpretation, emotional interpretive language. The listener may imagine emotions from any statement. I can say, it's Monday, and you can imagine how I might feel about Monday, but I haven't said anything about how I felt on Monday, that it's about Monday. So, but we're talking about when I say, it's another goddamn Monday. Now I've let you know something about how I feel about it. It's another discouraging Monday. Now I have been explicit about how I feel about it, right? Because when I'm goddamn, it's another goddamn Monday. Don't know if I, what it is that I'm upset about there. We just know that I'm upset in a certain way. We don't know I was upset because you don't like Mondays, or because every Monday is the day of the week that I have to pay the rent. We don't know what it is about it. So the listener can imagine emotions from any statement, but these sliders deal with the language that the teller uses to stimulate you to imagine emotions. Right? The questions you might ask about a statement to know if it's emotional interpretive language. Okay. Does it use language that explicitly specifies an emotion or an emotional state? Right. So when I said, he was upset, then that explicitly specifies his emotional state. He was frustrated. That says what his emotion is. Right. And so if something explicitly specifies the emotion or the emotional state, then we know that this is emotional interpretive language. Another question you can ask, does it use language that corresponds to the expression of or processing of an emotion? So I can talk about how I feel, but I can also talk about crying, for example, or feeling sad, right? Not a good example. Does it use language that suggests an unspecified emotion somewhere within a range of emotions? So we'll come to that later, but there we go. So emotional interpretive language, does it use language that explicitly specify anything you're looking at, a sentence, for example, does it use language that explicitly specifies an emotion or an emotional state? So explicitly specifies an emotion, her joy was contagious. So it specifies the emotion of joy.
Mm-hmm.
They could see the terror on his face, right? Also specifies the emotion of terror. Jealousy had clouded her judgment. See, these are all different kinds of sentences, but in each case, joy, terror, and jealousy, it's named. So jealousy had clouded her judgment. That's a kind of a metaphor because, you know, anyway. Explicitly specifies an emotional state. Joyfully, she heaped more on her plate. So this is specifying the emotional state. Here's specifying the emotion, joy, terror, jealousy. Here's the emotional state that corresponds to an emotion. Joyfully corresponds to joy. In one angry motion, she swept the whole pile of papers onto the floor. So angry motion is using angry as an adjective for emotion, and along the way, specifying the emotional state of being angry. So far, so good?
Well, I'm just,
Take your time.
difference between an emotion and emotional, okay, okay,
So joy is the name of an emotion.
right,
Joy-
it's the name, right, and then the other is the,
Yeah, sorry.
it manifests or something.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
Good.
you.
And thanks for asking the question.
You're welcome.
Anything else before we go on?
I think that's it. That was the,
Good question. I'm glad you asked it. William looked on jealously, so joyfully, angry motion. So typically, you do this emotional state, using adjectives or adverbs if you don't name.
right, and nouns in the first one, or,
Right.
yeah.
So typically, there's other more elaborate things, but that's typical. So the second question about emotional derivative language, does it use language that corresponds to an expression of or processing of emotion? So crying is an expression of, and also can be the processing of emotion of sadness. Right. So he cried through the entire ceremony. Every time she looked at his mismatched socks, she laughed. They failed to hide their yawns. So this is usually language that corresponds to the expression of an emotion or else the processing of the emotion. When she called him a failure, he saw red.
Mhm.
Right. So you see how what we're doing here makes sense. Any questions, clarification? You speak up.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
Third question: does it use language used to suggest an unspecified emotion somewhere within a range of emotions? So a statement or a gesture, even, does it use language that we really use language now? So does the statement suggest an unspecified emotion somewhere within a range of emotion? So when she came through the door, when she came to the door, his nostrils flared. Right. So we have the idea that your nostrils don't flare when you're thrilled,
Right.
but it could be anger or terror, right? But it excludes joy. So we don't know, is it anger or terror or any number of other things like that, but we know it's not joy or any number of other things like that.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yep.
So she saw him looking at her and smiled. So this could show, this smile at him looking at him, could show affection, amusement, gratitude, hopefulness, any number of things like that, but it excludes emotions like disgust and anger. Make sense?
Yeah, although a smile can be have negative aspects to it too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes, and there can be, name an emotion that would go with a negative emotion that might go with a certain kind of smile. You have one in mind?
Is frustration an emotion?
Yeah, absolutely. Frustration is an emotion for sure. Right, so you can have kind of a frustrated smile. Fair
Yeah.
enough. But
Well, I get it. I get it. Yeah.
good. And good clarification you gave there. Go on. As they talked, he kept clearing his throat. So this is the unspecified emotion, somewhere within a range of emotion. This he kept clearing his throat could show worry, agitation, or guilt, but it excludes things like confidence, right? So the interpretive ones are, they're not explicit, but they're often arranged.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
So the emotional interpretation slider on the no emotional interpretation end, Beth ate a bowl of cereal. There's no emotional interpretation, right? There's no emotional interpretive language at all of any kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't describe or suggest any particular emotion, emotional state, expression of emotion, so on. Explicit emotional interpretation include at least some explicitly emotionally interpretive language. Beth ate her bowl of cereal cheerfully. That's explicitly interpretive. It's emotional interpretive. You know, she's doing it cheerfully. So far, so good, right?
Yep.
Good. They explicitly describe or name at least one emotion or emotional state. Beth's little brother was playing under the table. There's no emotional interpretation there. We just get what he's doing. We don't get any hints about or explicit statements about what he's feeling. Beth's little brother was playing unhappily under the table. Okay, now we have unhappily, and that's pretty explicit how he's feeling. Beth offered a spoonful to her brother. No emotional interpretation. Beth lovingly offered a spoonful to her brother. Okay, there we got explicit emotional interpretation, right? Her brother refused. No emotional interpretation. Feeling neglected, her brother refused. Explicit emotional interpretation. Beth crawled under the table too. Can you think of a way to give explicit emotional interpretation? Now you get to decide what her feeling might be. So you have the whole range of emotions, but how might you explicitly convey that with Beth? With in this case, with her brother refused.
Well, okay.
Oh, with Beth crawled under the table. I'm sorry.
No, I was just does it, because it's Beth is the subject of that sentence, that it has to be about Beth, or can be about her brother, even though it's
yeah, actually, I did make it clear. We're taking the statement in this no emotional interpretation column, and we're finding equivalents of it.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to, you said, what would her emotion be? But I immediately went my mind to her brother's emotion. But because it's Beth, do we need to be sure we're talking about Beth in the explicit, or it could be her?
The first sentence was about the brother, and we have an example here. You want to come up with another example?
No, I'm just asking if, because
so now we're taking this statement. Beth
I know, but my response would be her little brother smiled with delight, but you want it to be about Beth.
Yes, about Beth. Yes,
that's my question. Okay, so
we're transforming this sentence over here.
Got you. Oh, okay. I understand. Yeah, I got it now. Okay, Beth crawled under the table too. Let's see, Beth tentatively or offered him the cereal, a spoon again.
Good.
Tentatively or
I had worried. You get to choose because you're using a language that explicitly tells us what the emotion is, and you get to choose the emotion and then choose the language that does it. But to fit in this column, it needs to be explicitly interpreted.
Yeah. So hesitantly, Beth crawled under the table.
Good. Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that would be another substitute.
Mm-hmm.
Another example of explicit emotion interpretation applied to Beth crawling under the table.
Mm-hmm.
Clear? Any questions or comments?
Nope, got it.
Good. So Beth ate a bowl of cereal. no emotional interpretation. Beth ate her bowl of cereal cheerfully. That's explicit emotional interpretation. What would be an example of implicit emotional interpretation about Beth and the bowl of cereal?
Beth smiled as she ate her bowl of cereal.
Good, I like it.
Because cheerfully, as we're getting to cheerfully.
So implicit emotional statements include at least some implicitly emotional interpreted language. They suggest or name an action that could correspond to an expression or processing of emotion, like the smile, or they implicitly suggest an emotion or a range of emotions. So let's see, what was the example you just gave? It was a good one. I forget what you said.
Beth smiled as she ate her bowl of cereal.
Beth smiled as she ate. So we're getting implicit emotional interpretation. Again, we don't know if she's smiling in joy or in evil anticipation, but we are getting implicit emotional interpretation.
Mhm.
And what did you say before? I forgot already.
Beth smiled as she ate her bowl of cereal.
Right, Miss Smile is her bowl of cereal. So that yeah, we don't know. That would be implicit because we don't know if she's smiling joyfully or with evil anticipation or whatever. So that good. You gave a good example there.
Okay.
Beth chuckled as she ate her bowl of cereal. Another example.
Mhm.
And chuckling moves us slightly toward assuming it's evil chuckling, but it could be. It doesn't take us all the way there. It's still
Right, right.
So far so good.
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. The effect of chuckle here describes an action that could correspond to an expression of emotion. We don't know if it's from happiness or dialectical anticipation of getting even with her rescue brother. But chuckle both shows her expressing an emotion and narrows down the possible emotions that Beth might be feeling without specifying the exact emotion.
Right,
So
right.
that's what this middle column is in this slider, right, the middle section. Making sense?
Yep.
Sweet. So Beth's little brother was playing under the table, no emotional interpretation. Beth's little brother was playing unhappily under the table, explicit. What might be an implicit emotional interpretation statement about Beth's brother playing under the table?
Beth's little brother was playing quietly under the table.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, it is. It's a very small hint, but it is a hint. Good. Do you want to try another one just for fun, or it's useful for you?
Say quietly. Well, we're trying to get to unhappily, so I'm not like.
Yeah, the emotion is going to be unhappily, but unhappy. But you get to point us in that direction without specifying.
Well, is this too implicit? I mean, explicit. Beth's little brother was crying under the table.
I will call that explicit because
Okay, yeah, because it's
actually
unhappy.
part of the
Yeah,
process.
it's got an emotion linked to it, sadness. I was playing under the table. Beth's little brother was banging a spoon under the table. Unhappy. Well,
Yes,
maybe.
It's still no emotional interpretation, but take that example and see what you can do with that. The banging of the spoon.
Even to make it explicit, or
Yeah,
what was your question?
Whichever one you want to go for. You choose whichever one. Start with the easier, and then we'll go to the harder one.
Well, Beth's little brother was playing quietly under the table.
Good. Okay. So now something that would be, yeah, that would be implicit because we don't know what quiet is about. Good. Good. And so yeah, I'll buy that. Here's an example I had. Beth's little brother was playing dull games under the table.
But that's emotion. There's an emotional content to dull.
There
Just
is,
playing games under the table.
Yes, it's implicit emotional interpretation. It's not explicit. So dull games doesn't exactly tell us how he felt.
Oh, I think it does because it's dull.
The games were dull, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's reasonable. For me, the effect of dull games is it can specify an emotion. He felt dull today.
Yeah.
What applies to games is just the brother's emotion without exactly applying it to how the brother felt.
Okay. Okay. To how he felt. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and these aren't black and white changes here. So,
Right. Right.
um, and there's a reason why we don't try to do more than 3 bands, because it's hard enough to distinguish between these 3. Yet
Yeah.
there is something that's clearly no emotional interpretation.
Yeah.
Is clearly explicit and stuff in the middle. So I think 3 is appropriate there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
good. Okay, I'll go on.
All right.
So Beth offered a spoonful to her brother. No emotional interpretation. Beth lovingly offered a spoonful to her brother. Explicit emotional interpretation. What might be an example of implicit emotional interpretation? And these are hard, by the way. Don't feel bad that you have to struggle, because these are difficult. It takes me a while to come up with examples.
Yeah. 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 Um. Because what I went to was Beth thought her brother might like some cereal, but that's not what we're doing here.
Right. That's actually about Beth's emotional state.
Yeah.
Good though. Good. Yeah. Keep going. It's really useful. Just spit out what comes to your mind, because that can help you lead to.
Sure. Yeah. Right. 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 Um. So again, it's a word that can have some emotion in back, but not necessarily which way we don't know. So let's see.
So let's suppose it's
Well,
loving.
Beth reached a spoonful of her cereal under the table to her brother.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, it's the same as offered, isn't it? But
Yeah, the reach doesn't really indicate anything about the emotion. We want to give a hint about the emotion without specifying it. Lovingly specifies offering it or reached. None of
yeah,
those have any suggestion of emotion. So we want something that suggests, but doesn't go all the way to naming it.
Mm.
You can tell me when you want to just be told, but I think it's at least up to a point, it's useful to struggle here.
Well, I'm just trying to see. Beth offered a spoonful. I give up.
Okay, fair enough. Patiently, Beth offered a spoonful to her brother. Might be a way.
Patiently.
So patiently doesn't tell us exactly what she's feeling,
Right.
but it narrows down the range of what she might be feeling.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And like I say, these are not easy, because it takes a while to kind of get in the hang of this. Frankly, I couldn't think of one with it before I changed the slide. So nonetheless, there is a distinction there, right? And
Yeah.
it is stuff we get to adjust. And so when we get better at it, we get to have fluency in making those adjustments. What's the effect of patiently? It's a word that describes an attitude, not really an emotion. But the attitude of patience is consistent with lovingly and not really consistent with angrily.
Correct. Okay.
So
Okay.
just
Yeah.
to get the hang of it more. So chuckled, patiently narrows down the range of emotions that Beth might be feeling. It's narrowing it down so it's getting it to a range as opposed to no specification at all, or much more specific emotion. And of course, it's really a continuum, so the edges are always blurry. Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
So her brother refused, no emotional interpretation. Feeling neglected, her brother refused. Okay, so we get, this is explicit emotional interpretation. What would be an implicitly emotionally interpretive phrase about the brother refusing? It's neither no emotional interpretation nor as explicit as feeling neglected.
Her brother turned his face away from the spoon.
Yeah. I think that is implicit. You know, it's on the no interpretation end of it, but it's definitely more interpretive than her brother refused, right?
Yeah.
Good. Let's see if I can come up with another one. So we're going from her brother refused to feeling neglected, her brother refused. And what would be in between? So it refuses is a pretty bare bones thing. It's hard to put much flesh on it. But what was it that he refused? I already forgot. A split the spoon, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it would work to say her brother sat there a long time just staring at the spoon or whatever it is. So we don't know if he's staring out of curiosity or out of disgust or right. So I think that was it.
Yeah, I think that'll work.
Okay, so his face scrunched up. Her brother refused. Another scrunching up faces. It's expressed in emotion, but it's not specified. We don't know if he just scrunches up his face in disgust, in uncertainty, or in mistrust. Right? Make sense?
Yep.
Good. It's tricky. We're not used to it. The good news is once we get used to it, or at least used to it enough that we can say, okay, let me take a few guesses and I will come up with something in the middle. Then it gives you a way to say, I don't want to specify, but I do want to indicate, right? I want to push the reader or the listener in that direction. And so you know it's possible. And the more you do it, the more facile you get at it. But even without being facile at all, you get to realize there is something in between there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want more than her brother refused, but less to telling exactly how the brother felt. That I can do that. I can do that. And the nice thing about the implicit place in the middle is that it gives us hints, but it doesn't tell us, and that can pique our curiosity.
Right.
And we like people to be curious about what we're going to say next. I'll go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. So, like chuckled, his face scrunched up suggests a range of emotions that Bess's brother is expressing and might be experiencing. Beth crawled under the table too. No emotional interpretation. Worried, Beth crawled under the table, right? So I'm using that first position for the adjective or the adverb phrase, but obviously it doesn't have to be there. What might be an implicit emotional interpretation around that same idea of Beth crawling under the table?
Slowly, Beth crawled under the table.
Good. It's heading us in a direction, isn't it? Yeah.
Or carefully. Yeah.
Carefully ups the ante. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because carefully might be that she's worried. It might be that she's worried. What she's worried about is a whole other question, but it's not specified here. I think you're happy with that, is that right?
Yes.
That scowl as she crawled under the table. And we don't know if the scowl is disgust or impatience, disapproval, or whatever.
Well, but scowl is negative.
It's negative, but we
Yeah.
don't know, is it impatience? Is it disapproval?
Well, that's true.
Worried is more specified, more specific than
Yes.
scowl, right? So all this stuff is tricky stuff, and language being what it is, nothing is born in one of these categories. So we get to this exercise of putting it in a specific category is really just a way of helping us get used to deciding, is this more or less explicit? This other thing. And again, it's not absolute truth, but we want to become quite facile in being able to adjust it one way or the other. That's right. So no emotion, the emotional interpretation slider rundown can no emotional interpretation can stimulate the listener to feel or imagine feeling an emotion. Yes, it just doesn't tell us what it is, right? So the answer is yes. No emotional interpretation. Does it use language that explicitly specifies an emotion or an emotional state? No. In the case of implicit emotional interpretation, it also doesn't use a language that explicitly specifies, but explicit obviously does, right? So we have a couple ways to begin to look at these three steps of this. Does it use language to suggest an unspecified emotion somewhere within a range of emotions? Would that be we're talking about no emotional interpretation, explicit or implicit? This idea using language to suggest unspecified emotion somewhere within a range of emotions.
No, for the first one.
Right, it would not be no emotional interpretation.
Correct. But yes for the other two.
Yes for the other two. If it's actually, if to be explicit, it would have to be specified emotion in some way.
Okay.
So does use language that corresponds to an expression of or processing of emotion. It
No.
would not be no emotional interpretation. Either the other two can use language that corresponds to or overly expresses. Making sense so far?
Yep, absolutely.
Who decides which emotion, if any, is present? In the case of no emotional interpretation on the part of the teller or the author, the listeners do it all, right?
Yep.
With implicit emotional interpretation, who decides which emotion, if any, is present?
The teller.
If it's implicit, the teller's hinting, but not exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
If it's explicit, the teller is
Teller's telling. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Can no emotional interpretation be used with any level of concreteness or sensory detail? Of course it can.
Yes.
They're completely separate in the same way that concreteness and interpretive language are completely separate. And so implicit emotional interpretation can be used with any level of concreteness or sensory detail, and so can be explicit.
Yep. Okay.
Interaction with the interpretation slider. Emotional interpretive language is a subset of generally interpretive language. So there's no interaction with it because the absence of emotional interpretation does not directly influence the degree of overall interpretation. Right? I ate breakfast. What degree of interpretation is this statement? Think of for a moment of an oral language now, right? So think of a character who might say this, who might say, I ate breakfast. So you
Okay.
just come up with in your mind with a sort of a character in a situation.
Okay.
And tell me what it is. It's okay if you're discovering it as you describe it.
Tell you what, the
The
character?
moment about the character who might say, "I ate breakfast." Who's the character? What's the situation?
Well, Jack, and he's having breakfast with his mom before he goes out and all the adventures.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, right. So the beanstalk Jack or whichever.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Good. Okay, so you got the character.
yeah.
All right. Then, what are this character's characteristics? What's the characteristics in your mind of Jack, the beanstalk Jack?
In terms of how he looks or how, what? He's pretty carefree. He's young. He's it's a good morning. He woke up in the morning feeling pretty good. And he's up for adventure.
Good. All right. How old is he in your mind?
He's a teenager.
Good.
Built,
You've been calling him he, so I assume
yeah, he's male.
Where did your Jack grow up?
On the farm.
Good. And under what circumstances?
Struggling. The
Hmm.
farm is struggling.
Nice. And at the moment of eating breakfast, what was Jack's situation? You get to make this up, obviously.
It was a good morning. I mean, it was morning, and he awoke and did his chores, and he came in for his breakfast.
And how was he feeling about her?
He's feeling good. He got his chores done. It's a sunny day. He's ready to take on what's next.
And where was Jack when he was trying to eat breakfast?
In the kitchen with his mom.
Good. What was his purpose in eating?
He was hungry, so take care of his hunger.
In your mind, was Jack facing any impediments to achieving his purpose, to being able to eat?
No, his mother prepared the breakfast. It was there for him to eat, and he started eating.
Nice. So, when we had you sort of do it in advance as you do it, but you can answer these questions and then say, okay, if those are the answers to the questions, then what's it going to be like for Jack to talk? It says, "I ate breakfast." Think of the character who might say it. What are the character's characteristics? Age, gender, where, circumstances, character situation at the moment. Where was the character when trying to do it? What was the character's purpose in eating? Was the character facing impediments to achieving that? And then all of that, you imagine it your way. You can write it down to help you remember what it is, and then you get to say, make your "I ate breakfast" equivalent statement with whatever interpretation you want.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
But it's oral language, so we're using just the words "I ate breakfast."
Right.
We choose that character and all that things that went along with it, and then so you have your character in mind. How would your character say "I ate breakfast," given the state that you just described for the character?
I ate breakfast.
Good. So it's proud and it's affirmative.
Yeah.
And nice, right? Another character might say, "I ate breakfast," right? That'd be very different. Good.
Yeah, yeah.
This all makes sense as a way to go about this, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So how did the degree of interpretive language change through the addition of non-word elements of language? So when we're doing written language, which doesn't have any non-word elements to speak of,
Right.
then that it's difficult to change the degree of interpretive language except with the words. There are some examples. Sometimes an exclamation point can change it, but it's not always true. It's some moderate inexact changes. So when we add non-word elements of oral language, how does that change the degree of interpretive language?
Oh, it can change it a lot. It can change it totally, and how it's said, as all those characteristics of oral language, gesture, tone of voice, pitch, facial expression, they can change everything.
Well said. Well said. And did it change any of the other sliders? Not necessarily, right? Although depending on what you're saying, it could, right?
Yeah.
So there's nobody else to try. I ate breakfast unhappily. How interpretive is that? Is it no explicit interpretation, or implicit interpretation?
It's explicit.
Yeah, that's actually.
Yeah.
So imagine your same character, Jack, saying the statement, whether Jack was unhappy while eating or not. So you get to decide, is Jack still happy about it? Is he going to say I ate breakfast unhappily? Or is he actually going to take a different Jack statement, different Jack situation, and have him say it? So so imagine Jack, you to decide whether he's actually unhappy or not. Then decide, is he actually unhappy or not, and then say how he would say it given your decision.
I don't understand how he could be happy or not if he says it's unhappily.
Oh, you don't?
No,
Okay. How could you say I ate breakfast unhappily and in a way that would suggest the opposite?
well, then it's, I ate breakfast unhappily.
Yeah. That is already going a long way to it, right? It almost sounds like he's happy to be unhappy, but that'll count.
It doesn't make sense.
Sorry, my brain just went fluffy. Let me get something more liquid in my system here. I'm gonna get myself back on track. It's a degree of interpretation. So I breakfast unhappily. So if Jack was happy eating, then he would, and he wanted to indicate unhappily, then he would have to use tone of voice or something to say it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. So he was happy. I ate breakfast unhappily. Right. And I used inadvertently, but typically how I moved my head and how I rolled my eyes and stuff like that.
Well, if you switched it, I mean, if we switched it around, unhappily, I ate breakfast.
Yes, nice.
Meaning, you invited me to breakfast, but I've already had breakfast. So
that's a whole other. Yes,
yeah,
good.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, good. Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole other meaning to
Right.
breakfast. Yes, good, big, perfect.
I ate breakfast unhappily.
I'm so sorry I did, because I love to eat again, but I
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
got it. All right, so let's go on. I ate breakfast unhappily. Does someone same as so how did the degree of interpretive language change through the addition of non-word elements of oral language?
Again, it changes everything because it's a totally different expression.
It changes to any possible degree, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that's worth noticing.
yeah,
Characteristic of oral language is not true about written language.
yeah, that's right.
And written language has its ways of doing it, but it has a fewer options.
Right. Yeah.
So did any of the other sliders change in this? You could do it in a way that would change any of the other sliders. We're not going to go into that.
Yeah, yeah.
So okay, with that, I ate breakfast and I read breakfast happily, just as a written language statement. The degree of interpretation is explicit interpretation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So then you can think of, given that it's going to be oral language, how your character might say this, even when the character was happy or wasn't happy. We already did that. So
Yep.
so okay. All right, so going on. So the first conclusion here is oral language can make a written statement more interpretive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can take a pure description statement and transform it to implicit interpretation or even explicit interpretation.
Right.
Just by tone of voice, facial expression, all the rest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can an oral language make a written statement less interpretive? What's your first thought about that?
No, because it's written already.
Okay, let's see. Can it undermine the
Okay.
of interpretation. And in fact, if you use sarcasm, for example,
Mm,
then that oral language add-on,
mhm,
tone and stuff, can actually reduce the degree of interpretation.
okay, yeah,
Make sense?
yep.
So, what was our language there before? I ate breakfast happily, right? And so, can I make it less interpretive? Um, yeah, because I can say, uh, you know, I ate
Okay,
breakfast happily.
yeah, yeah.
So the meta messages indicate feelings or intentions, including sarcasm. Using that oral language can undermine the degree of interpretation of a statement.
Mhm,
That's just a little surprising. You wouldn't think of that right off, but it's true. So there's 3 strategies for oversalted foods. We're making it a metaphor, analogy, right? In cooking, you can make food saltier. It's very easy. You add more salt, right? But how do you make foods less salty?
mm.
Cooking. You do enough cooking to have answers to this, right? If you put in too much salt, what do you do to make it less salty?
Well, if it's in a soup or something, you add more water or
Good,
some
yeah,
kind of liquid,
yeah. So you can
dilute
add
it.
more of the other ingredients. You can um,
Oh,
um, add other ingredients to give a strong dose of a different state to overpower it, right? You can add a lot of sweetness or sourness or both, and that will make the effect of saltiness less. Or you can modify it. I think you did the kind of the modifying thing. There's foods that bind with salt to absorb or change it. So, in the case of hotness, we know that the capsicum, the chemical that makes things spicy, is neutralized by dairy.
mhm,
If you've got too much capsicum, you add dairy, and the effect of the capsicum is modified. So these are 3, in this analogy with food, these are 3 ways that you make something less of something,
mhm,
right? And diluting, masking, or modifying.
mhm.
And guess what? In storytelling, once words make something more interpretive, you cannot entirely remove them, but you can do one of these 3 things. You can dilute their effect by dialing up other sliders or using other oral language elements. You can mask them by adding other meanings that distract from the meaning in the words using other elements. Or you can modify using oral language elements that directly affect how the interpretive words are understood.
Mhm.
So the same 3 strategies: diluting, masking, or modifying. And that is something that great writers and very experienced writers know how to do intuitively, but they're not aware of those options. And so if you're doing it intuitively, fine, you don't have to worry about it. But sometimes being aware of the options can make it easier for you. Do I want it? Okay, I want it to be less interpretive, even though the words are interpretive. But to make it the effect of it less, do I dilute it? Do I mask it, or modify it? So the strategies for modifying, you can use a questioning tone. What was it? What was I saying before? I already forgot. What was it? Oh, I ate breakfast happily, right? So, um, so questioning tone, right? I ate breakfast happily, right?
Mhm,
Or he
mhm,
ate breakfast happily. So the questioning tone already modifies the interpretive state of it. A tone of sarcasm can do the same thing, right? We talked about that.
mhm,
The I don't really know tone. I ate breakfast. Right. So those are all ways to modify
mhm,
what you're saying with oral language elements.
mhm,
Okay. And the I don't really know tone is usually preceded by a pause.
mhm,
John ate, I don't know, a bowl of cereal, I guess. Right. All right. So we've done the sensory detail slider. Let's just review the sensory detail language slider. Its nickname is the sensory detail slider. Its abbreviation is SD for sensory detail. The listener may interpret any statement, but our sliders deal with the language that the teller uses. This slider deals with whether the language is used by the teller interprets for the listener. Sensory detail language slider is the language used by the teller interpreting for the listener. So does the language name or suggest a specific specific sensation? So if the sense is sight, you name the sight. She discovered a troubling sight. You can name the use of the sense. She saw a bloody stain. Does the language name or suggest a sense-specific sensation, like hunger, right?
Mhm.
A sense-specific sensation is a sensation that fits in a particular sensory mode. So red refers only to sight. Stripe refers only to sight. Itch refers only to touch. Her stomach tensed only refers to kinesthesia. Right, so those sensations are sense-specific. Right. Sweet scented refers only to smell. Acrid refers to smell or taste, nothing else. Non-sense specific sensations, soft could refer to touch or sound, or maybe even sight. It's a soft light, right? Makes sense.
Yep.
Good. Rough could refer to sight or touch. You can see a rough texture, but you can feel a rough feeling on your fingers or your skin. He was bent over could refer to sight or to kinesthesia. So I'm seeing somebody bent over, or I'm actually feeling the bending over. Right? The latter would be kinesthesia, the first would be sight, obviously. So the context can make an ambiguous sensation sense specific. So all these things that we've talked about can do it, the words and all that stuff, but also the context can do it. Soft could refer to touch or to sound and maybe sight, but his voice was soft, which gives you the context, can only refer to sound. So this context, soft is sense specific. Make sense? Question?
Yep, absolutely.
Roughness could refer to sight or to touch, but the darkness hid the tabletop's roughness can only refer to sight. So in this context, roughness is sense specific. Yeah. Question? Thought?
Well, the darkness hid the tabletop's roughness because you couldn't see it, but you could feel it in the dark.
That's true.
So
Let's see. So how does that fit in here? So once we know that it's the darkness that's doing the roughness is about
it's sight. Yeah.
So when we know it, when we know that we're talking about darkness, then we know that we're not talking, roughness isn't about how it felt to your fingers.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Darkness wouldn't hide how it felt to your fingers. So that's what I mean by it. In this,
Okay.
Okay. Bent over could refer to sight or kinesthesia, but he couldn't bear another minute of being bent over. It can only refer to kinesthesia. In this context, bent over is sense specific. Making sense?
Yep, absolutely.
The word sense is so late, the word feels odd to even say it in that other way. So to explicitly specify a sense, the language must use a word or phrase that names a sense-specific sensation, like red or a bright flash, which is specifying vision, or use the name of a sense, like sight, or use a word that names the use of a sense, like sees, or use a word that names a sense-specific category of sensations, like color. Use the word color. So to all those are ways that we can explicitly specify a sense.
Mhm.
And they're all different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, we can use them differently, right? So the sensory detail slider, no sensory detail on one end, I sensory detail. Why does it say interpretation there? Interpretation.
Doesn't say, oh, I see.
Maybe I meant that I don't know. I'm a little fuzzy about this. I'm actually going to stop a second and make a note of what this slide is. This is slide number 272. So note to myself. Note to self. Check out slide number 272. And is it right in the two? Okay. All right, it's ready. 272. You can sort of read all three things. Okay, that was up and down. All right, so sorry. Moving back.
All right.
All right, so and now I'm not seeing you. What did I do so I could see? Oh, I'm in PowerPoint. There we are in Zoom. Now I've got to share the screen again. That's what it is. All right, so there we are. All right, so here we have no sensory details. Yeah. The language in no sensory detail. Language does not specify or suggest any sensory detail or any sensory sensation. When it's implicit, the language includes language that implies but does not specify a sensory sensation. Explicit, but obviously it's explicitly doing that. So sensory detail slider, how can language imply or suggest sensory detail? It can suggest but not specify a sensation, like a horse's blinders or hunched shoulders. Those can suggest it but not specify it.
Mm-hmm.
Language that suggests a sense but is used metaphorically, like bright idea. Language grounded in a sensory metaphor, like insight. So insight doesn't at all specifically suggest sight, but implicitly evokes it in a small way.
Interesting. Yeah.
And if you want to get sight going, you could use the word insight and people wouldn't notice, but they would move them in that direction a little bit. So sensory detail implicit statements, they include statements include language that implies but does not specify a sensory sensation. Sensory detail explicit statements include language that names a sense or its use or names a sense-specific sensation or category of sensations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's all the way of defining what those are, right?
Uh-huh.
It's complicated, but that complexity is part of the nature of language. And so if you're going to be able to adjust your language, you need to have some grasp, conscious or not, of all those aspects of it. So how oral language affects sensory detail. Beth ate breakfast. So what are some oral language channels you might be able to use to increase the degree of sensory detail in Beth ate breakfast? So it doesn't have any sensory detail in it now, but could you say that in a way that would, for example, increase the sensory detail in that statement as spoken?
Sensory detail. Well, Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast.
Good, but now we're just going to use oral language to do it. We're not going to change the written language part. We're going to add things like sarcasm or tone of voice or where you're looking.
No, but not change the words. I see. Okay. Beth ate breakfast.
Nice, nice. It definitely did the first part, which is changing the tone there. In your mind, did it in any way up the ante on the sensory detail?
Well, it's not specifically. I mean, I would assume the
Good.
taste
Did
was
it,
good,
did it
but
imply,
wasn't specific.
move the needle a little bit?
Yeah, I think so.
Say how it was a needle. What
Because it was enthusiastic, that she was enjoying it, so
nice.
it was a positive experience.
Nice, absolutely, absolutely. Because if you all you're doing was writing the words Beth ate breakfast, it wouldn't convey that. So you'd have to use more words to do it. But you could do oral language, you can do it without using more words, just by changing the tone. And you gave a great example.
Good,
Making sense what I'm trying to, the point I'm trying to make here?
Yeah, I do.
How about if you wanted to dilute, mask, or modify the amount of sensory detail in Beth ate breakfast?
Well, it's Beth ate breakfast.
Nice, nice. Yeah, you gave us some sort of, to me, I don't like this exercise I gave, because Beth ate breakfast doesn't have much detail. Right. So we would want to take something that had some more detail. I wonder if I'm smart enough to. No. So so we want to increase the degree of sensory detail. So to dilute, mask, or modify, there's hardly any, there's no sensory detail there, so you can't really dilute, mask, or modify it. So let's take a statement that has more sensory detail in it and see what we can do there. Let's see. Yeah, I think it might be worth taking another minute or two to do this. So we're going to have a statement that has some sensory detail in it about Beth eating breakfast. So make one up.
Well, then can we do Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast?
Sure, that certainly ups the ante, isn't it? And that's very explicit. So it'd be fun to see if we can fuss with that. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast. I think it's going to be a really good example. I'll find out. So that's the example. So what other oral language channels besides words spoken orally, like tone of voice, like pacing, like where you're looking, all those things, could you use to increase the level of sensory detail of Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast? Yeah, she ate breakfast.
So how to say that with more involvement as an oral storyteller is what you're saying?
Right. So you're going to use elements of oral language such as tone of voice, or how you're standing, or pausing, or anything like that. And you're going to make this have even more sensory detail. This new statement, Beth smacked her lips as she ate. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to write that in there now, because it would be better. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast. Okay, so that's our new. And I got that, and now I'm going to go and show it. Zoom, share the screen. All right, so now our sentence is Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast. So we're trying to figure out some way to use oral language to increase the sensory detail in that already pretty well. The smacking lips is already has some sensory detail, but we're going to add more sensory detail just by using the other one or more oral language channels.
Well, I see if this works.
Yeah, try stuff and notice the results and then try something else.
Okay. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast.
Good. Yeah, so that definitely ups the ante. Could you put that same tone, that tone into it without the words? I don't know if it's possible. Give it a try.
So I'm sorry. So do what without?
So the tone, right? But don't
Yeah.
use the words in it. In other words, see if you can say Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast in a way that gives us the sense of what that you gave through the tone.
Oh. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast.
Yeah. I think you take that even further. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So that ups the sense of certainly the degree. Does it so to add the level of detail? Let's see. Then we might have to do something maybe with sound. How about using sound to increase the sensory detail of Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast?
I don't know how to. No. I don't know how to do that sound, but
Okay. Yeah. So I'll try it since I suggested. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast.
okay, yeah.
So that increases the degree of sensory detail.
Yep.
So you see how it's possible there.
Yep, absolutely.
Tricky, but that's the nature of oral language. We can do stuff like that without changing the words because we have all these other channels we can put in. Another way to do it without using the sound. Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast. So now I'm getting a sense of it taking, the smacking of the lips is taking longer. The words took longer. But you also imagine it taking longer, which means it's more savoring of the smacking.
Yep.
Good. That's a good example. Conclusion number 2 to this business about how oral language affects sensory detail. Oral language can give a written statement more sensory detail, right? It can take a no sensory detail statement and transform it to a sensory detail suggested statement, or even to a sensory detail explicit statement.
Yep.
That's clear. Conclusion 2b, can oral language give a written statement less sensory detail? Ooh. So if the sentence is Beth ate from her polka dot cereal bowl, then how could we make it seem to have less sensory detail by saying, and I don't know the answer to this question. So it could be that I have a stupid question, or maybe there's a really good answer and we'll both learn. Do you care to take a stab at it?
Beth ate from her polka dot cereal bowl.
Good. Okay. So you gave it the sort of lackluster tone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and just
Good. Yes. Yeah. We don't think so. The polka dot recedes with that tone, doesn't it?
yes.
Yeah.
Because you would usually say, because if it's there, Beth ate from her polka dot cereal bowl.
There you go. Right. So that makes it easy to bring it out. But you also did that other thing of kind of Beth ate from her polka dot cereal bowl. Right. And so the polka dot is clearly de-emphasized there.
Right.
So you did it. You did the job. Did I ask you?
Well, thank you.
Well done. So conclusion is, by using the strategies of dilution, masking, or modifying, oral language can undermine the degree of sensory details of a statement. So let's think about it. Did we do Dilution? We kind of did dilution by putting in some other.
Yeah, I think that one was dilution, I think.
What were you going to say? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That I would agree that it was dilution rather than the other two.
Yes. So, so masking, and this moment, I don't remember what I mean by masking. Let's see. Thank heavens there's an up and a down button on the list. No, this is part of this, right? So what do I mean by masking in this case? I'm sure that I was right when I said it, but at the moment, so yeah, we talked about oral language channels to increase the degree of sensory detail. So to dilute it, to mask it or modify it. All right. So we can easily dilute it by by using tone or something to, or even sounds in oral language to let me take a shot at this. So like, Beth smacked her lips as she ate breakfast. So I think that might set the example of diluting it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even masking it.
Yeah.
I don't feel the need to go into dilute, mask, and modify it as separate things, but just I think the point is to notice that you can reduce it, the effect of it.
Yep.
By using oral language.
Yep, in different ways.
So oral language can give a written statement more sensory detail. Take a no sensory detail statement and transform it to a sensory detail suggested, or even a sensory detail explicit. When we get that smacking out there, boy, we got a sensory detail that it's explicit, even though we never said anything about smacking lips. So I think this is a true conclusion. Do you agree?
Yes.
Right. Oral language give a written statement less sensory detail, and yes, it can, because we can mask or otherwise diminish the effect of the polka dot syrup. And modifying. I'm not sure what I mean by modifying here, but I'll give myself a break for today. So this is our final conclusion in this: how oral language affects sensory detail. Can undermine the degree of sensory detail of the statement, as well as increase it or vary it. So that's interesting to me. You wouldn't immediately think that. It took me a long time to decide, oh yeah, this is true. Any questions or comments on any of this so far?
No, I think that's good. And it is very interesting to think about the effect of words and how they can be changed and written versus oral and how that works.
Sweet. So do you want to go on?
Sure.
So emotional imagination. So emotions are generally felt in reaction to something that happens. So it makes sense to view a character's emotional responses as reactions to the moves performed by the character or someone else in the story. So just a simple way of saying, if the character does something, does a move that has a emotional response to, then that's happening. We can show that's possibilities. And it could be the character's responses to moves performed by others, or even to what the character himself did. So what's a move? A move is anything, this is my little definition for sort of a slang word. A move is anything that happens in the story that's capable of producing a reaction from a character. So it has to be perceptible to the character, therefore. Right. So if you yourself are doing it, then it's probably perceptible enough. But if somebody else is doing it, the other character can't respond to it without perceiving the move. So which character is making, whose actions, feelings, or thoughts are being described. In other words, if this is a movie, who would the camera likely be on? So that's the first questions we might ask, right? We don't have an example on this table, but next, are the actions being described, are they perceptible to the other character? Because that doesn't count as a move unless it's perceptible. Does the other character have a way to know that they're happening? People, now then, there's 4 kinds of emotional reactions. This is kind of fun. Involuntary physical reactions. So that's like crying or shaking or laughing or sobbing, right? So we'll abbreviate that for P, for involuntary physical reactions to an emotion. Second is thoughts. You can have thoughts based on an emotional reaction. And I'm having an emotion and it leads me to the crying or the sobbing or whatever, but also can lead me to thoughts. Makes sense. That's pretty unobjectionable. It can also lead to actions, and it can lead me to speaking. So these are these 4 ways we can respond. We can respond to 1 or of the 4, or 2 of the 4, or 3 of the 4, or all 4 of the 4. Those are our choices in how we respond in a way that others can perceive. No, just these are the ways we respond. We either have an involuntary physical reaction, and or we have a thought, and or we perform an action, and or we say something. Those are the only choices. So the emotion reaction sequence rundown, the kind of reaction, internal / external. Sorry, I just got a wave. This is part of it. When I talk too fast, I don't get enough oxygen. I'm sure that it wouldn't happen as much if I weren't already having trouble with this stuff, but given that I am, it happens more quickly. So emotional reactions, involuntary physical reactions. When I say internal, external, what I mean is it can be something internal that creates something external. So it can just be the internal, but it can also be the combination of internal, external. So the involuntary physical reactions can be that first thing. The thoughts can be internal, which by nature, actions are external by nature, and speech is external by nature. Okay, so that these are 4 different kinds of reactions to these 4 different things. Are they typically perceptible? In the case of involuntary physical reactions, not typically, but they can be perceptible. So blushing can be perceptible, but clenching the stomach might be perceptible depending on the exact details of it and the degree of it and how good a view you have, but not inherently. Are you having trouble reading what I'm saying?
It's very small. Yeah, this slide is very small. When you've done the rundowns, they're really small.
Sorry, I'm sorry to make it that small. I don't know a way to make it bigger for you. I can make it bigger. That isn't making it any bigger for you, is it?
Yeah, it did. It did.
Oh, well, hell's bells. I can do that.
Yes.
Good. All right, that worked. Who knew?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, good thing I tried what I knew.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's good.
All right. So good. Thank you. I just learned something. Will I remember it? We don't know.
Sure you will. That one you'll remember, I bet.
We hope so. So where are we in this now?
So we just got the first 2 levels.
Right.
Typically
So
perceptible. Yeah.
is the internal that leads to external typically perceptible, but not typically, but it can be in the case of something like blushing or tears running down your face. The thoughts are internal. Can they be perceptible? No, but they can lead to the perceptible. So our thought can lead us to a facial expression or to tears or to taking action. So they are not by themselves perceptible from the outside. And this be the strongest move and should therefore come last. So the idea is that if you have series of moves, you want to lead to the climax move. It's kind of silly to say, you know, he slammed his fist on the table and shouted, and his face screwed up a little. You know, his face screwed up would be a good start to that sequence, but it'd be a crappy end to that sequence. So the strongest move generally should come last. I'm sure you can create situations where that wouldn't be, but typically that's true. So the involuntary physical reactions can be the strongest move and therefore should come last if they're perceptible by another character. Okay. So can the thoughts be the strongest move and therefore should come last? Only when one internal thought causes the next without external intervention.
So I don't understand that. Go ahead.
So for example, do we have an example on the floor?
You're smacking your lips. Is that still?
Yeah, we had a no, so I don't think we really have an example on the floor.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so let's come up with an example.
Okay.
Just give me one. Just give me a statement of some kind. I'll write it down.
Just anything, or is
yeah, just anything.
Well, today it's another cloudy day.
Nice. Okay, so I'm just gonna write this here. Today is another cloudy day. Now you'd think I'd be able to spell another correctly, but I managed to get the H in the wrong part. And so, all right, so now I'm going to let's see what happens. So first of all, save it. And second of all, I will show it. And so save from current slide. All right, so you see that today is another cloudy day?
No, I don't see it. You haven't shared.
All right. So, oops. Oh, I haven't shared the screen.
Right.
That would be useful. All right. So, because I'm in PowerPoint, I'm not in Zoom. There we go. I will get this eventually. Share the screen. All right. So today is another cloudy day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what will we do with this? I already forgot. All right. So today is another cloudy day. Where am I going? Oh, okay. So sorry, I'm gonna move that down. I'm gonna make it so that this takes less space. So make it broader. And I'll put it down over here. And now back to here. Now we're going to type in the current slide. Now you don't see the slide yet, do you?
No.
So I haven't done it, but I can do that. All right. So now we have today is another cloudy day at the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good. Okay. So that's our statement that we're trying to deal with. And so so that's a statement. So in terms of in terms of action statements, this would actually be an abstract statement because there's no action in it.
Correct.
Um,
So we want something with emotion in it because then we can look at the,
well, we're going to see if we can add it to
okay,
but actually, I'm gonna change from another cloudy day to something that actually has action in it. I think
Good.
it'd be better if we don't start with something that's abstract. So let's do kind of another statement that has action in it.
He happily joined the pickleball tournament.
I'm gonna leave out the happily for now, but he joined the pickleball tournament. Tournament and make that broader so it doesn't line. And move over so it's somewhere else. All right, so let's see what happens now. We show this. Okay, so that's there now.
And just a reminder, we're coming up on 10 minutes to the end of class.
Oh, thank you. All right, so I'm going
We're
to.
not getting to Rapunzel, darn, but maybe next time.
Oh, we're not. Yeah, well, that's okay. We'll save Rapunzel then for
Okay.
next time. It'd be a very good last time thing to do. Hang on. So PowerPoint, I am okay. We got that here. So now I go over to Zoom. Now I share the screen. You see why you typically do all this in advance. There. Okay. So all right. So there we have. Can you see he joined the pickleball tournament on
I
there?
can indeed. Yes, indeed.
Sweet. So life is good. So the kind of reaction to join the pickleball tournament by itself is external, I would say.
Yep. There's something, he had to do something to join.
Right, or even the joining is some kind of an action. It's probably a summarized action because what do you do to join it? You have to do the specific things.
Right, right.
So what am I looking for here? The kind of reaction. I don't remember why I'm doing this now. Let's just go back up. Let me get back down. There. All right. So the rundown of the emotional reaction sequence. I'm lost. Can you help me?
I don't know. What's the
Yes.
next
All right. So we're going
thing on the,
that's 4 different ways. All right, I'm gonna leave it there. So okay, so let's just go on to there's 4 different ways to respond. I've just said this already.
yep.
Yes, these 4. Okay, so good. So wait, I'm moving it forward, but it's not moving backwards.
No, you're going backwards.
That's bizarre. Okay.
Always interesting. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. We got others.
Here we go. Here we go.
Clicking on it to make it move forward. I was using my ring on my mouse, which should work, but it was working backwards. All right. So we've got all this. This makes sense, right?
Yep. And we got the next one done. And then, so we're going to the next one.
Can it be the strongest move? If it's perceptible, yes. Thoughts, only when one into. Okay, so we did all this.
Yeah.
Where does it usually go in the sequence? If present, yes.
We didn't do this one. We didn't do that one.
So, sorry?
We didn't do the where does this usually go in the sequence?
Okay, great. So, so in a internal, which can lead to external reaction, usually should be first in the sequence because it helps listeners feel and interpret. The thoughts usually go before the perceptible. Occasionally it's different. See it, you know, sees this and all this stuff and then has a thought. But typically the thought I mean, sorry, I'm not sure I'm saying the right thing. The actions typically come after the internal reactions. And if the action is the strongest move, you put it at the end of the sequence.
Mhm.
And the speech typically comes after the internal reactions, and it's also at the end of a sequence if it's the strongest move. So imagine that she came in carrying his favorite vase and dropped it on the floor, right? And so the involuntary physical reactions, what would be an example of an involuntary physical reaction that someone else might have to that?
That would come after that?
So somebody sees her do that, drop
Yes.
it on the floor and smash it, and someone else has a involuntary physical reaction. What might
Oh dear.
it be? Right.
Oh my.
Okay, good. And there were words with that, but there was also a physical reaction. Was it really physical part of it? The gesture? Is that what you mean?
Other than the gesture, you mean actually what you're feeling? Oh dear,
So
physical.
you had an involuntary physical reaction to seeing it.
Right. So it would be, oh dear, or something.
Okay. And the oh dear is part of the speech part, but
That's true.
but you also did a gesture, right? So
Yeah.
for now we're just looking at the gesture, but that's
Gotcha.
fine.
Okay.
Got it. Good. So the involuntary physical reactions are usually are first in the sequence.
Yep, that makes sense.
So if he joined the pickleball tournament and somebody else had it, or he or somebody else, maybe somebody else had an involuntary physical reaction to him saying that, what might it be? We get to make this up.
Just physical? Oh,
Yeah, good. Good. Yeah. Good. Yeah. The nodding, right? So and if it was a strong one, just so we have another example on the table, what would it? Well, you have to imagine the situation, obviously, but what might be a strong involuntary physical reaction to knowing that he joined the dang pickleball tournament? Good. Okay. Good. Right. So it's a pleasure. Good. So he joined the pickleball tournament, and the particular thumbs up thing is the part we're looking at now. So involuntary physical reaction to that could be this physical thing, right? But which is usually this is voluntary, but it's good enough. The thoughts that go along with that. We'll go with this. What was the thought in your mind?
good for him.
Good for him. Good. The actions, and maybe this is more of an action than involuntary physical action. Maybe let's say for here, that assuming he's pleased, the involuntary physical reaction might be something like a smile, or sound you might make. Whoa, right? That might be the involuntary part. Then the thoughts typically or the next thing we're talking about, then the actions, which might be this, and then the speech, which is good
for you. Yeah.
Good for you. Exactly. Good. Okay, so we got that. Good. It took a while to get the example. We have a good example now.
We have it. Doug, I'm going to have to go in just a couple minutes.
Okay. So so each of these could be omitted, right? After involuntary, after as a response to this, and they can each be repeated at any point in the sequence. So we'll stop with this there and give you a chance to say something that one or more things that you like to learn or find useful from today's lesson.
Well, the considering in terms of emotions, no emotion implicit and then explicit. So that's really something for me to think about, to clarify. I think clarity in storytelling, being able to apply those ideas, and is this implicit or is it explicit? Which way do I want it to be? Let's
Right,
make sure the language matches.
right. That's exactly the point of this.
Oh, good.
Which way do I want it to be?
Yeah.
And this is fairly technical. It takes a long time to explain it, and I can hardly remember it from one moment to the next. But the point is that when you get this internalized, it becomes something you practice well enough to do it without having to think about it, then that's available to you anytime you need it.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And
Practice.
so that's why it's worth doing this
Yep.
fairly exhausting process.
So that the understanding is there to be able to be practiced. Yeah.
That's right. And you therefore have those options accessible to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, a lot of people have them, some or maybe even all of these accessible unconsciously. And when we make them conscious, if you have them all working well unconsciously, you don't have to worry about it. But by going through the process of making them consciously, you can first of all become aware of them when you might not have been.
Exactly.
And then you can think to, oh, here's a list. Can I use this one? Oh, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought of that one. That's not possible, is it? Let me try and see if it is possible.
Yeah. 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 Excellent.
So all of that is by way of why we're going through this semi-excruciating process of breaking this down to this low level, is because when you get all the details there and begin to learn to use them, even if you've been doing it using them unconsciously before, when you get to this conscious level, then you have the ability to say, okay, how about if I add that one into this other one? But if I add that one and this other one into the other one, and that means that you've gained a whole new level of competence and flexibility.
Exactly. And tools you can use. Right. Right.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You've been so wonderful and patient with my various mess ups here, and
Oh,
it's
you're
been
welcome.
great fun working with you.
Well, gosh, a private lesson. Very cool, Doug.
That's good.
Thanks. Have a great week. See you next week.
Same to you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.